Chapter 5 Cardboard Alchemy. Did you know? If you're lucky enough to own a 1956 Topps Hank Aaron, you have two Hall of Famers for the price of one. While the headshot is Hank Aaron, the action shot is actually Willie Mays. Not much could beat the feeling of purchasing a collection with the 1993 SP Jeter rookie, selling the collection and having the Jeter for free, along with a pile of cash. It made me feel like Rumpelstiltskin. This was the game I played, and the rules of my game were simple. Buy a collection, have fun going through the cards, take out the cards I wanted to keep and sell the rest, and finally make money and have cards left over for free. This was the true meaning of for fun and profit to me, and is what I consider cardboard alchemy. Sure, a lot of time and effort was involved, but when you love something like I love baseball cards, it doesn't seem like work at all. I have come across some incredible items, but no matter what it was, I would always see more value in the money than the item. It didn't mean that I didn't love the pieces. I just never really came across anything that I had a desire to keep until I began my Conseco Super collecting journey several years later. Through all this, I realized that I was not just a collector, but also a dealer. Not only a dealer, but a dealer who was buying out dealers. Over the course of a decade, I dealt in excess of 10 million cards. I purchased collections that would fill my minivan and inventories that would fill my garage. Armed with an outlet to share my dealing experiences through my blog, the feedback from my audience motivated me further to look for deals. Listed below are a few of them that have stood out to me over the years. The Case of the 18 Cases. One of my earliest scores as a dealer came from someone locally. I found someone that mentioned they had a bunch of unopened cases of baseball cards for sale from their shop they had closed down several years prior. The majority were from 1989 to 1992, but it looked very intriguing. I reached out and the ex-dealer sent me a spreadsheet of everything he had. Aside from the cases of baseball cards, he had several football and basketball cases as well. This was a little out of my comfort zone as I was just getting into buying cards to resell for profit, so I decided to contact him about his baseball cases. After going back and forth for a while, we ultimately came to an agreement. For $400, I was the proud owner of 18 cases of baseball cards, and he delivered them to me. I was not used to spending this kind of money on baseball cards in one shot, but at roughly $20 a sealed case, it seemed to make sense. All 18 cases sat in our living room for longer than Holly would have liked. For some reason, she doesn't share the same love for baseball cards that I have. There were cases of 1989 Fleer, 1990 Upper Deck, 1992 Topps, and various others. The one thing I wanted so badly as a child was to be able to open up a full case of baseball cards, and now I had 18 taking up a considerable amount of space in our house. It would literally keep me up at night as a child. The thought of busting through 20 solid boxes of 1989 score was the stuff my dreams were made of. This was like heaven, but it got even better. As we were loading up the last case in my living room, he put it down on the ground and said, "Oh yeah, one more thing. I was wrong. This isn't a case of 1990 Upper Deck complete sets. It's a case of 1989 Upper Deck complete sets." That's like buying a car and the sales guy saying, "Here are the keys to your Honda, sir. Oh, by the way, it's actually a Corvette." This made an already sweet deal absolutely ridiculous. I ended up making all my money back and then some by just selling that one case to somebody's girlfriend in Seattle. She thought it would make an excellent gift for her boyfriend who was a Griffey fan. Not much longer after that, someone else contacted me. A Little League coach who wanted to buy all of the commons from a case of 1992 Topps. This allowed me to break my first case ever, but on someone else's dime, and keep all the goodies. With 20 boxes of 36 packs each, I busted 720 packs and had a blast doing it. Not long after this, I was contacted by a nice older man who buys cards on the cheap to have fun going through them and then gives the rest away to sick or poor children. Because of this, I agreed to sell to him for less than I had originally wanted. In the end, I made some profit, fulfilled my lifelong dream of opening a full case, and Holly got our living room back inside of about 3 weeks. The estate sale find. A little over a month later, I was searching online for deals and came upon an estate sale. Among a myriad of items listed for sale was a line that simply said, baseball cards. I emailed and asked them if they could elaborate. Their response was short. We are unable to give you any information about them. If you're interested, please drive out here tomorrow morning before 12 and take a look for yourself. It was a good 45-minute drive, and I don't even know why I bothered, because the odds were it was just going to be a pile of 1988 score bound together by rubber bands. Ultimately, I decided to drive out and take a look because it was Saturday morning and it would be a perfect time to check out something like this. I was expecting a house, but it ended up being an apartment. People were buzzing in and out of this person's home, carrying armloads of things back to their cars. The owner was an older gentleman who could no longer live on his own anymore, so his family flew out from California to sell his belongings and take him back with them. As I walked in, I told a woman that I was the one who emailed about the baseball cards. She led me into a separate room where there were thick matching binders filled with baseball cards wall to wall, 75 binders in all. When I dug in, I quickly found out that the man had taken all of his baseball cards and placed all the players in order by their last name. Some letters had multiple binders represented. When you look at a collection organized this way, you don't start with A, you start with G for Griffey or J for Jeter. I went to the G binder first to see if anything good was in it, and as I opened the binder, it was as if there was no real rhyme or reason as to how they were placed in the pages. The pages had all kinds of different years and brands of different players. I was beginning to think the man had more money in the binders and the pages than the actual cards themselves. 91 Fleer, 95 Score Select, 94 SP, and others could be found. After flipping through several pages with nothing but commons to show, there were some Griffey rookies and game used cards randomly throughout the binder. I went to R for Ripken and Rodriguez, and it was the same. Then J for Jeter and T for Thomas. While I knew the bulk of the collection would be commons, I just wanted to make sure all the good stuff wasn't taken out already. There was enough to justify making a move. The woman came back in to check on me, and I gave her an offer of $400 for everything. She didn't like that too terribly much, and I said the highest I'd be willing to go is $450. Well, a man came in and offered $500. He said he would come back for them if I agreed to the price, but I like you more, so I'll accept your offer for $450. I gave her the money, and she helped me make several trips back and forth to load my car to the brim with binders. When I got home to take a closer look, I was delighted to see that there were tons of star rookies and game-used autograph cards throughout the binders. I had a blast going through everything over the next few weeks, and ended up selling the cards with all the low-end stuff in it for more than I paid for the entire collection. Plus, I had an enormous amount of good cards left over for free. At the time of purchase, I calculated that I had about $6 in each binder, which I figured when you factored in the pages as well, it was a good price even if no cards at all came along with the deal. I was even able to keep several binders and pages for my own personal stockpile. It seemed like a number of collections I had purchased would include lots of new storage supplies, so for a long time I never needed to buy any. The entire room worth of binders sat in my office and stayed there while I would spend the next several days enjoying going through and listing them. The only downside was that it made my office smell like a 90-year-old had lived there. A small price to pay for living amidst cardboard gold. Over the next several months, I made several deals of various sizes. It was pure bliss. I was truly enjoying myself with the thrill of the hunt. One issue I always seemed to run into was the challenge of educating the seller on the value of their cards. Everyone heard stories from their parents about how they had all kinds of cards in the attic from the 50s that were worth a small fortune. Because of this, many thought that their collection of 80s cards would be worth something as well. As a buyer, I had to break the news to them that many of their cards were virtually worthless. Some would be accepting of this, and others would walk off in a huff. I was able to fine-tune my speech somewhat so I could sound as convincing as possible without being offensive. Many of these deals were for $50 to $200 early on. The next deal, however, is one that I'll remember forever. The 6 million card deal. Before I went into selling mode, I met somebody online who worked as a part-time dealer since 1985. Not only did Dwayne set up at card shows, he also used to promote them. I first reached out to him when I was still trying to collect one of every complete set from the 80s and early 90s. He said he had some and invited me over to his house. When I got there, he had about 6 complete sets sitting on his dining room table. I was underwhelmed because I thought he had a lot to choose from. I was very disappointed and don't even recall buying any from him that day. Then he showed me his garage. As he pulled up the garage door, it was a different story. I'm fairly certain I heard angels singing. 800 count boxes were stacked floor to ceiling as if they were massive Jenga structures. Countless 2,700, 3,200, and 5,000 card boxes were housed there as well. The cards in the garage were situated in rows and columns front to back, spaced out with just enough room for a person to get through them. I was speechless. Unfortunately, he didn't have anything else to sell to me at that time, but I knew he would at some point. He also mentioned that he had a few storage units packed with cards as well. Over the next several months, Dwayne and I became friends, and I purchased a lot of cards from him, sometimes in bulk of 100,000 cards at a time. It was a blast being able to go through them all, and I frequently went back to him for more. One day, I had him over to show him what I had. As we sat in the very office that I wrote this book, I showed him a number of signed jerseys and bats that I had recently purchased, as well as a ton of stars, rookies, and inserts I had acquired from various collections. After going back and forth, we ended up making a deal. All of my good stuff for 6 million of his cards. I received a lot of negative feedback from others saying it was a horrible deal, but I knew what I was doing. The deal worked out great as he agreed to bring them over a little at a time, so that way I didn't have to store all those cards in my house. I don't even think my house could store that many unless we wanted to use the cards as furniture. I would refer to Dwayne as Santa Claus because he would always come over with a vehicle packed full of cardboard for me. Though the deal happened years ago, I still have over 2 million cards left to go through. This has been one of the most fun deals I've ever made, and I will always enjoy watching people's eyes bulge when I tell them how many cards were involved. Massive wax pack find. I've picked up a number of collections under many peculiar circumstances. One collection I picked up due to someone needing money to bail someone from jail. Another had a run of complete sets from Topps dating back to the early 80s that were purchased as an investment with the intent to put them through college. The entire run ended up being picked up for under $90. There are countless of other stories I have, but this next story comes from a guy whose father passed away. He was called to remove his belongings from his father's home. When he got there, he found a ton of recent unopened wax packs. The person posted an ad online stating he had a bunch of wax packs that he would sell for 50 cents each. While I was expecting the pictures to show a bunch of 1990 Upper Deck and 1988 Fleer, I was pleasantly surprised. All of the packs were 2009 and newer. There were tons of Allen and Ginter, Heritage, Platinum, and more. I hastily emailed him asking when we could meet, and he said the next morning. I was so excited I could barely sleep. He was nearly an hour away, but if what he was saying was true, it would be well worth the trip. The next morning I got up early and made the drive. I was just down the street from the seller when I received an email saying that he could not meet anymore. Something had come up and maybe later would work. I decided to email him asking for a different time or day. Crickets. I waited all day and didn't hear a peep. I emailed him again and still nothing. Had I come on too strong? Did I sound like stranger danger? I wasn't exactly sure what the problem was, but I knew I couldn't just give up. At the same time, I didn't want to be annoying and pester him. I did the next logical thing and contacted him using an alias account. Let me start off by saying that I do not condone this sort of activity. It wasn't my intention to be deceitful. I just wanted to see if he was ignoring me. My fake identity was to approach him in a much more laid-back manner. If he responded to my fake account and not my real one, I knew that I would have no chance of using my real account to set up something with him again. As I crafted an email to him, I casually asked questions about the collection. Much to my surprise, he responded quickly. I was astonished. What on earth could I have said under my real account that would have made him feel so uncomfortable? In any event, he was comfortable with the fake me coming over to his apartment, so it worked out. I drove up there once more and knocked on the door. The man opened up the door to his small upstairs apartment. His entire front room was covered in loose packs of sports cards. The majority were baseball, but there were some football and basketball as well. It was almost as if 25 sports card sections at Walmart had exploded in his living room. The only thing I wanted to do was pull a Scrooge McDuck and swim in them. I asked if anyone had purchased any yet, and he told me someone came the day before to buy 100 packs for $50. I was fine with that because that wasn't even the tip of the iceberg. The seller said the plan was just to keep selling them at 50 cents a pack, so I asked what he would be willing to take for everything. We went back and forth for a while, and I even found that he had several binders full of great cards as well. We came to a price of $420. I loaded up everything, while almost blowing my cover by saying my real name when I was retelling the story to him, and drove off. I'm telling you, I am not cut out for living a double life. When I got home, I quickly unloaded and started counting the packs. There ended up being around 5,700 in total. I had no idea there were so many, so I was very excited. Over the next several months, I enjoyed them by opening nearly every single pack myself. It would be a fun ritual of mine each day to grab a pile of packs to open at my desk or while watching a baseball game. In addition to having fun ripping all of them, I was also able to sell what I opened for a nice profit. Black Friday. When you think of Black Friday, you may think of good deals and mass chaos. I think about news stories of people being trampled to death in the name of finding a killer deal on a flat screen television. If there's one thing I know about this wretched day, it's that I will not venture out in public for anything. This suits me just fine though, because the largest online baseball card dealers run specials, which meant that I would stay chained to my desk. For a handful of years on Black Friday, I would set my alarm at 4 a.m., grab some breakfast and a caffeinated beverage, then wear out the refresh button on my keyboard to see what new special was going to pop up next on the Blowout Cards website. I imagine this was the same for countless other collectors looking to score a good deal, as multiple cases of cards would sell out in seconds. I always seemed to do well though. I would sometimes end up spending several $1,000s to pick up these cases and sell them locally throughout the year. Doing this was a fun way to deal in wax and break some boxes for free at the same time. Finding ways to make money off lots like this was like a fun puzzle for me to figure out and was truly rewarding. The only downside was looking back at what I sold and seeing that I had dozens of 2011 Topps Update for $40 each, which routinely go for nearly 10 times that now. The Tri-Star Baseball Card Show. Twice a year, the Tri-Star Baseball Card Show would come into town. This is the same show where I first met Jose Canseco when I was a child. I'm not exaggerating when I say it felt like Christmas every time I attended. I would be among the first to show up on Friday and among the last to leave on Sunday. Atticus would come with me at least once each year, and we would have a ritual of partaking in a ridiculously overpriced hot dog, soda, and a hunk of fudge. It was a fun bonding time for us. While he was more into it for the junk food, it was fun to be able to explain to him what the significance about it T206 cards and Babe Ruth signatures. From time to time, we would run into Star Wars figures or cards, and his eyes would light up. I would go from table to table looking for deals I could make money on. I could frequently be seen borrowing a dealer's dolly to wheel out newly purchased inventories to my minivan, which I would affectionately call the Cardboard Mobile. While it was good to be there early to get the hot stuff, it was even better to be there at the end. You could catch dealers looking to unload their tables of stuff they were unable to sell. Many times, what I found is that I could sell the bulk of the stuff that the dealers couldn't. I would try my best to sharpshoot what I thought I could move for good enough profit, and oftentimes that meant going for things in bulk. Whether it was 200 complete sets of junk wax, a horde of framed autographed pictures, a Pete Rose autographed bat lot, or boxes of vintage commons. If it was something I thought I could move, I would pick it up. Some of the greatest times for me would be sticking around at the end of the show and buying out a dealer's entire multi-table setup. 7,000 plus autographed baseball card deal. One day while I was browsing listings on eBay, I noticed someone selling some in-person autographed baseball cards in lots of 50 for cheap. I reached out to him and asked if that was all he had or if he had anything more. As it turned out, the seller had over 7,000 autographed cards. Going to various spring training and baseball games was his life for 20 years. I considered making an offer on the entire collection, but it was difficult to do something like that sight unseen. I told him my plans and asked to purchase a small sample lot of 200 autographs or so. That way I could get a better feel for what he had. We ended up striking a deal. All of his autographs for $1,300. At the price I paid, I knew I could buy everything and turn a nice profit with a little work. Before doing so, though, I wanted to make sure they were from a smoke-free home, that most autographs were from major leaguers, and that there weren't dozens of autographed cards of the same player over and over and over again. It's one thing to sell 40 New York Yankees common autograph cards. It's quite another if the 40 Yankee cards are all Andy Stankiewicz. I was nervous for them to come in because you never know what could happen to cards in transit. Did he just ship in a few 3,200 count boxes? What if they were dropped en route and corners of an entire row of cards were dinged? The cards ended up making it over just fine and quite frankly were overwhelming. What was I going to do with 7,000 plus autographed cards? My first thought was to pull the good ones and list them to recoup my money as quickly as possible. Another idea I had was to put them in team lots, though it would have taken a lot of work to organize. Ultimately, after selling a few small amounts of them, I ended up putting them online for sale as one large collection. Within 3 weeks of purchasing, I had a bite. A dealer and his partner messaged me asking the usual questions. You know the questions. If they are from a smoke-free home, mostly major leaguers, and if they were all Andy Stankiewicz. I told them yes, yes, and no. That was enough for them, so they ended up doing the deal with me and flew from out of state to come and check them out. After about an hour or so of going through them, They bought the lot for $3,500 and were on their way. A massive haul of comic books? I never really was a comic book nerd. Sure, as a kid I had some, but it never really was an obsession of mine. I loved Spider-Man, Punisher, and I remember when comics came out about Superman being dead. One day in 2012, while I was checking out what was for sale on Craigslist, I found a guy who was selling his comic book collection for $600. This was intriguing to me, so I made the drive out to see them. I had no idea what I was looking at, so I had to reach out to my dealer friend Dwayne, whom I did the 6 million card deal with. He's a huge comic book collector, by the way. And he said at that price, it seemed to be a safe bet. There were 24 long boxes, so it came out to be less than $17 a box, which was no-brainer for me. After recouping nearly all of my initial investment by selling to collectors locally, I sold everything else for a $1,200 profit by shipping them to a shop in Dallas inside of 3 weeks. When it rains, it pours, right? Over the next year and a half, I ended up acquiring about 5 different large comic book collections of all shapes and sizes. With how much I hated the idea of having a minivan years ago, I can't tell you how happy I was to have one during all of my various purchasing excursions. A few months later, I reached out to a lady who was selling her comic books. She mentioned she had tons of long boxes filled with DC comics that were all bagged and boarded. I made her an offer of $800 and she said no because she had a better deal out there. It turned out the guy she was talking about was the same person that left me hanging on a deal for my previous comic lot I had just sold, so I had a sneaking suspicion that he would do the same to her. I thanked her for her time, requested she keep my phone number, and waited to hear back from her. Exactly a month from the time I bought the other collection, I received a text from her. You can pick up the collection now if you still want it. My suspicions were correct. The guy that bailed on me ended up bailing on her too, and she said she had to get them out of her house because she was moving. After dinner and going through our routine with Atticus at night for bedtime, I armed myself with some caffeine, an MXPX CD, and set out for the drive that was over an hour away. After speaking with her for a while, it turns out it was her recently deceased husband's collection. He had passed away earlier in the year. I felt horrible for her, so needless to say, I wasn't in full bargaining mode, even though there were fewer comics than I had expected. While the deal ended up working out great, the worst part was probably bringing them all from her upstairs room to the cardboard, comic book mobile. I was able to move the collection fairly quickly, and then it happened again. More comics. Each time I would sell a comic collection, it would be right on the heels of making a deal for another comic collection. The same day I sold the comics of the lady's deceased husband, I started talking to someone else about his collection. I told him I was ready to buy, and he said he was holding them for someone who put a deposit on them and took a third of the collection with him. Throughout the next few weeks, I checked in, and he still said he was waiting. But the deadline was set for December 3rd. If the guy didn't come up with cash, he was going to allow me to come over. I was excited, though at this point I had forgotten what kind of a deal it was. I just remembered it was a killer deal. I asked him to remind me, and it turned out to be the same amount of comics from the last deal, about 7,000, for $400. I was just hoping that the other guy would bail out, and he did. Friday night, I made the half-hour trek up to his house. It was amazing. He told me I probably had 3 or 4 trips to make, but I assured him that my minivan had an incredible amount of room in it and has handled 7,000 comics with ease before. As I walked in his house, I was guided to a room in the back that was stuffed to the gills with comics. There was no way this was only 7,000. I loaded up the minivan to the brim, and there were so many more to go. I asked him if I could unload them at home and come back. He agreed, and I must say I had the most miserable time unloading them. It was past midnight, and I was exhausted. On the bright side, the total count was approximately 20,000 comics. I had never seen that many or had that many comics before at one time. It took 2 trips, and I was praying all the way home that the clearance between the back tires and the wheel wells would still be there. I was in absolute shock. There were many duplicates, and it was so overwhelming I didn't even know where or how to begin looking. It's one thing to have 20,000 baseball cards in your garage. It's quite another when you have 20,000 comic books. That many cards would take up a tiny corner of my garage, but that many comic books would take up the majority of my entire garage. Thankfully, it didn't take long for someone slightly crazier than me to make a purchase for $3,000 for all of them. The buyer told me he had a warehouse where he stored all of his treasures away from his wife, so she wouldn't know anything about his purchasing habits. Boy, is she going to be surprised if he passes away before she does. On the day of the sale, he hired a team of 3 guys with a massive 18-wheeler to load up everything and drive off. It was always satisfying to see a fairly empty garage after being packed up to the ceiling for a while. When the holders are worth more than the cards. One day, I responded to an ad for a 400,000 baseball card collection. I reached out to the owner, and he said I could come over in the evening. I made the trip over and immediately knew the guy was doing well for himself. The neighborhood I entered to get to him was very upscale. His house looked like a mansion. He came out and had me meet him in his garage, where he had a beautiful flat screen television with a football game on. The garage was oversized, and parked in the left of it was a beautiful brand new Corvette. The more I got to speak with him, the more evident it was that he had been partaking in a number of alcoholic beverages. He wasn't slurring his speech or falling over, but he smelled of alcohol and seemed very chatty. He mentioned to me that he purchased everything from a dealer about 11 years ago who passed away due to cancer. He had $15,000 into the entire inventory. It was obvious he had sold many of the original cards before I got my paws on them, as there simply wasn't nearly $15,000 worth in the lot. Or perhaps he severely overpaid. But still, there were many fantastic cards. There were hundreds of autographs and several brand new heavy tubs filled with memorabilia. Before making an offer, I asked him if this was all of the collection. His eyes darted around for a while and said, "Oh yeah, wait a minute." He hopped inside and came back out with another few piles of cards. These cards ended up being the best in the entire bunch. Remember, kids, always ask if that's all they had. I made an offer, and he accepted $1,300 for everything. Well, everything that he still wasn't hiding in his house. As with any collection, this one came with thousands upon thousands of junk wax commons. Instead of cardboard boxes, though, they were in these plastic 2-row containers. This is probably the biggest surprise of all in the collection. Just for the heck of it, I checked online to see what the containers themselves were going for. As it turned out, the containers were worth much more than the common cards themselves. I was able to make hundreds of dollars selling them off and dumping the cards into cardboard boxes. When the dust had settled, I sold everything for $4,600. The million card inventory. The largest deal I ever made, that required me to take on the entire inventory at once, was from a dealer who decided to get out of the business. He stated that he had over 1 million cards. I'm generally skeptical of these kinds of phone calls. I've had several of them in the past, and they never quite seem to be what they are supposed to be. Whenever I go to check them out, they typically seem to be a small fraction of the quantity they state, and almost always tend to be filled with 1988 Donruss Greg Jeffries, 1998 Upper Deck Eric Anthony, or similar. I drove out to his residence, and it was not looking good. Across the street was a house that had suffered massive fire damage, and the house I was going to appeared to be all of 800 square feet at best, with the roof caving in. There was a thought in my mind to just drive on by. The odds of anything decent being there were slim, but this was just a case of not judging a book by its cover. I chose to hop out and knock on the door. I did, after all, drive 45 minutes for this. I might as well take a peek. A nice older gentleman opened the door and explained he needed to get out of the house because the landlord wasn't properly taking care of it. The cards were just too much to move. He guided me to a room where monster boxes were piled from floor to ceiling, wall to wall. Everything was situated on heavy-duty shelving units. It was right then and there that I believed this might be the real deal. Every box was properly titled, and nearly all the cards were in order. It was difficult to believe that one person could do all of the sorting in one lifetime. He then led me to the second room. This room had a bed and television, and more monster boxes lining the walls that were stacked from floor to ceiling. As we made our way to the front room, there were long boxes stuffed under light stands, smaller boxes in a curio cabinet, and other boxes on the floor. Walking further into the house to the kitchen was truly a sight to see. The nook that was meant for a refrigerator was filled with, you guessed it, baseball cards. Even the carport outside was loaded up with cards. At least a tarp was over them. Simply put, I had never seen anything quite like this before in my entire life. I don't know what was more jaw-dropping, the fact that this man lived in a cardboard palace or that every card was in order. Every nook and cranny had cardboard, and there was so much of it that it was even spilling out of his driveway. He could have been a legitimate candidate to be on one of those TV hoarding shows. On the phone, he mentioned it would take $1,000 to get everything. When I told him I would take it and proceeded to give him the $1,000, he balked, saying it wouldn't be $1,000 for everything. It would be $2,000. It's never fun to have someone pull a bait and switch on you after having driven a long ways away. Perhaps he was second-guessing his decision to sell, but even at double the quoted price, I was still a buyer. Thankfully, I brought more money with me just in case, so I gave it to him as quickly as possible before he could change his mind. I made 4 trips across town loading up the cardboard mobile to the gills, testing its suspension to the limits each time. All told, it was 6 hours of drive time alone, not to mention the countless hours of loading and unloading. Fortunately, every last card barely fit into my garage. Over the course of the next 3 months, I enjoyed hanging out in the garage just to look through some of them. It was a blast. It would have been impossible to go through everything in a lifetime, but since every box was labeled, I was able to take a look at the boxes that interested me. The curiosity could have easily killed me. I remember making my best impression of Dig Dug by lifting boxes and putting them behind me over and over again, just to see what was in the middle of literally tons of cardboard stacked high as my head. If they fell on me, I would have been toast. Over the course of 3 months, I sold the entire inventory, along with everything else from other deals I had made, for over $15,000. My office and garage that were perpetually filled to the brim with cards and memorabilia were now empty. It felt like a chapter of my life was coming to an end. Never in the 10 years of wheeling and dealing did I ever not have something to sell. There was always something that would keep me busy, but this last deal wiped me out. It felt so final. Sitting at my computer in January of 2015 and writing up an article about it seemed like I was signing off from the dealer aspect of the hobby for the last time. I felt accomplished but somewhat empty, happy but sad. I think the chaos that came along with all kinds of stuff to sell, leaving so abruptly, could be described as how you'd feel when you have a big party at your house and everyone leaves. One moment there's a mass commotion of laughing and overlapping conversations, but when you close the door after the last person leaves, all you hear are your dogs licking themselves. Over the next couple years, I would continue to buy and sell cards, though not nearly in the volume that I used to.